Welcome to the world of science fiction. I am Adam, your narrator, where extraordinary tale come to life. Enjoy. The journey lost in the snow. They had only their warmth to keep her alive. Olivia Reed pressed her foot harder on the accelerator, squinting through the windshield as fat snowflakes began to obscure her vision. The forecast had mentioned a light dusting, but the darkening sky and rapidly accumulating snow told a different story. She'd taken this impromptu trip to her uncle's remote cabin to escape from her failed engagement, from the pitying looks of friends, from the suffocating atmosphere of the city. Now, as the rental car struggled up the winding mountain road, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The vehicle fishtailed suddenly, sending her heart into her throat. Olivia fought the wheel, managing to straighten out just before reaching a sharp bend. Her knuckles were white with tension as she navigated the final stretch to the cabin, relief washing over her when the small wooden structure finally came into view through the thickening curtain of snow. By the time she parked and grabbed her bags, the wind had picked up considerably, driving icy particles against her face as she trudged to the door. Her fingers fumbled with the key, numb despite her gloves. When the lock finally clicked open, she practically fell inside, slamming the door against the howling gale. The cabin was cold but mercifully solid. Olivia dropped her bags and headed straight for the fireplace, grateful that her uncle always kept a stack of firewood inside. As she arranged kindling and logs, she tried not to think about how quickly this snowstorm had escalated, or how isolated she now was. With spotty cell service at best, a crackling fire would make everything feel less dire. Just as the kindling caught, a thunderous knocking at the door made her jump. Her heart pounded. Who could possibly be here? The cabin was miles from the nearest neighbor. Cautiously she approached the door, peering through the peephole. A man stood on the porch, snow covering his dark hair and shoulders. He looked half frozen, his face pale except for windburned cheeks. Hello, she called through the door. Who are you? Name's Nathan Cordova, he shouted back, voice barely audible over the wind. My truck slid off the road about a mile back. Saw the smoke from your chimney. I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I've got frostbite starting. Could I come in just until the storm passes? Olivia hesitated. She'd come here to be alone, and letting a stranger in went against every safety rule she'd ever learned, but leaving someone to freeze to death went against everything else she believed. She unlatched the door, and the wind nearly tore it from her grasp. The man stumbled inside, bringing a swirl of snow with him. Up close she could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, his face handsome despite being reneged from the cold. He wore hiking boots and a parka across his features. Olivia stared into her cup of tea. I was supposed to be married next week, she said finally. Instead, I found my fiancé with my bridesmaid. Apparently it had been going on for months. Nathan's expression softened. I'm sorry, what about you? She countered. No wildlife photographer comes to these mountains during blizzard season. A shadow crossed his face. I used to come here with my brother. He died last year. Climbing accident. I scattered his ashes near the summit last week. Was heading back when the storm hit. The honesty in his voice made something shift between them. Survival would require trust, and trust required truth. As the blizzard raged outside, the two strangers began to thaw toward each other, finding unexpected warmth in shared vulnerability. As the night grew colder, Around them the third day brought no relief from the storm. If anything, the wind howled with renewed vigor, rattling the cabin's windows and finding every tiny crack to send icy drafts spiraling through their refuge. Olivia woke, shivering despite the blankets piled on top of her. The fire had died to embers overnight, and the temperature inside the cabin had plummeted. Nathan was already up, struggling to rekindle the flames with the dwindling firewood supply. His face was drawn with concern as he worked. "Morning," he said, glancing up at her. "We're down to our last few logs. I checked the woodshed through the window. It's completely buried under snow." Olivia pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "How long do you think this will last?" Nathan shook his head. "The wind shifted overnight. That's rarely a good sign." He finally got a small flame going and carefully fed at the smallest pieces of wood. "We need to conserve everything. Heat, food, water." As the day progressed, they moved around less, sitting close to share body heat, talking in low voices to pass the time. Olivia learned that Nathan had been a wilderness guide before turning to photography, that he had a small apartment in Boulder filled with books on wildlife and ecology, that he'd never been married but had once been engaged to a woman who couldn't understand his need for solitude. In turn, she told him about her job designing websites for small businesses, about her dream to someday open a cafe bookstore, about how her ex-fiancé Thomas had made her feel like she was too much, too emotional, too dreamy, too idealistic. "He sounds like an idiot," Nathan said simply, and his straightforward defense made something warm unfurl in her chest. By evening the temperature had dropped further. They could see their breath inside the cabin, and Olivia's fingers felt stiff with cold. The last log went onto the fire, and they both watched it burn with trepidation. "We could break up some furniture," Nathan suggested, but most of the cabin's furnishings were heavy oak pieces, impossible to break down without proper tools. That night survival overcame awkwardness. They pushed the sofa close to the dying fire and huddled together beneath all the blankets they could find. Body heat, their only remaining resource against the deadly cold. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Olivia whispered, needing distraction from their dire situation. Nathan was quiet for so long, she thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally he said, "I blame myself for my brother's death. I was supposed to be with him that day on the mountain, but I cancelled because of work. If I'd been there." Olivia found his hand under the blankets and squeezed it. "You can't know that." "What about you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I was relieved when I found Thomas cheating," she confessed. "Part of me had been looking for a way out for months." Their honesty hung in the air between them, creating a different kind of warmth. By morning Olivia wasn't feeling well. Her head throbbed and she couldn't seem to stop shivering despite the blankets. Nathan pressed a hand to that had clearly seen better days. "Thank you," he breathed, removing his snow-covered hat. "I didn't think anyone would be up here with a storm coming. Weather report completely missed this one." "I know," Olivia replied, keeping a careful distance. "It wasn't supposed to hit until tomorrow, and nothing this severe." Nathan nodded, rubbing his hands together. "Signal's completely gone now. Radio in my truck said it's going to be a 3-day blizzard. Never seen one come on this fast." Olivia's stomach dropped. 3 days. She'd only packed food for herself for a long weekend, and now there were 2 of them. "Let me check the supplies," she said, Moving toward the small kitchen area, an inventory revealed enough canned goods and pasta to last if they were careful. The cabin had a propane stove and a wood burning fireplace for heat. Water might become an issue if the pipes froze, but they could melt snow if necessary. Nathan hovered awkwardly by the fire, clearly trying to give her space. I can sleep on the floor, he offered, and I'm handy good with repairs if anything breaks. I promise I'm not. I know this is uncomfortable. Olivia nodded stiffly. We'll make it work. Not like we have much choice. As evening descended, the storm intensified. Wind shrieked around the cabin's eaves, and the temperature plummeted. They took turns adding logs to the fire, sharing minimal person details as they prepared a simple dinner of canned soup. Nathan mentioned he was a wildlife photographer up in the mountains to capture winter scenes. Olivia shared only that she needed time away from the city. That night, huddled under blankets with the fire dying to embers, Olivia lay awake listening to Nathan's steady breathing from his makeshift bed on the floor. The wind outside sounded like it would tear the roof off. She wondered about the people in her life, if they knew she was in danger, if they would worry when she didn't check in. Thomas, her ex-fiancé, had already moved on with someone new. Her parents were traveling abroad for the first time. She felt the true weight of how disconnected she'd become. Morning brought no relief. The cabin windows showed nothing but white snow piled halfway up the glass. Olivia made coffee on the propane stove, while Nathan examined the door. We're completely snowed in, he announced, his expression grim. I tried to open it, but there's at least 4 feet against already the chimney. Olivia asked, fighting rising panic. Still clear for now, but we'll need to check it regularly. They settled into an uneasy routine as the day progressed. Nathan gathered what tools he could find and reinforced the windows. Olivia organized their food supplies into strict rations. They spoke little, two strangers forced into intimate proximity by circumstance, each carrying their own secrets and sorrows. As night fell again and temperatures dropped further, Nathan finally broke their careful silence. Why did you really come up here alone, he asked, firelight flickering her forehead, and frowned. You're burning up, he said, concern etching lines around his eyes. We need to get your fever down. He melted snow in their last clean pot using precious fuel from the camping stove and soaked a cloth to place on her forehead. Throughout the day her condition worsened. By nightfall she was drifting in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently. Nathan knew they were running out of options. The storm showed signs of weakening, but Olivia needed medical attention. The nearest hospital was 30 m away, and his truck was buried under snow a mile down the mountain. As Olivia slept fitfully, Nathan made his decision. He wrote a note explaining his plan, left it beside her, and gathered what supplies he could: a flashlight, matches, a compass, and the emergency blanket from his backpack. He fashioned crude snowshoes from broken chair parts and cord, then dressed in every layer he had. I'll come back for you, he promised. The sleeping Olivia, brushing sweat dampened hair from her forehead, hold on. The cold hit him like a physical blow when he pushed through the snow drift blocking the door. The wind had indeed died down, but temperatures remained brutally low, and snow stretched endlessly in every direction, obscuring familiar landmarks. Using his knowledge of the area and the compass, Nathan began the treacherous journey down the mountain. Each step was a battle against exhaustion and cold. Several times he Fell plunging into deep drifts each time. Forcing himself back up thinking of Olivia alone in the cabin, her fever. Rising hours past his extremities went. Numb then painful then numb again, a dangerous sign just when his strength was failing. Lights appeared in the distance, the main road a snowplow had made it through, and behind it a line of emergency vehicles responding to calls about stranded travelers. Nathan staggered toward them waving his flashlight. Frantically Olivia woke to unfamiliar voices and the sensation of being lifted. Through fever-blurred vision she made out uniforms, medical equipment, a helicopter. Nathan, she called weakly, he's being treated in another helicopter. Someone told her he's suffering from hypothermia but should recover. He walked almost 5 miles in blizzard conditions to get help for you. 3 days later Olivia sat beside Nathan's hospital bed watching him sleep. The doctor said he would make a full recovery, though frostbite had damaged several of his fingers. She had recovered from her fever, pneumonia caught from the cold and dampness more quickly than he had from the extreme exposure. When he finally opened his eyes and saw her, his face transformed with relief. You're okay, he said, voice rough. Thanks to you, she replied, taking his bandaged hand carefully in hers. You could have died out there. There didn't seem like much of a choice at the time, he said simply. 6 months later they stood together on the deck of that same cabin, now bathed in summer sunshine. The mountain that had nearly claimed their lives spread out before them in verdant beauty. Hard to believe this is the same place, Olivia said, leaning into Nathan's side. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her clothes. I never thought I'd be grateful for that storm. Olivia smiled, turning to face him. My uncle says we can use the cabin whenever we want. Apparently he approves of how we handled adversity together. Nathan laughed, then grew serious. I know it's only been 6 months, but when you know. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box carved with intricate snowflake patterns. I'm not Thomas the First. Don't think you're too much of anything except exactly what I need. Inside the box lay a simple ring with a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. The blue reminded me of your eyes that first night by the fire, he explained suddenly. Nervous tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she nodded wordlessly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The mountain air seemed to whisper around them, a gentle reminder of the storm that had brought them together and the warmth they had found in each other when survival depended on it. From strangers to this, she said, looking at the ring on her finger. Who would have thought? Sometimes, Nathan replied, drawing her close. You have to get lost to find exactly where you're supposed to be. Their kiss was warm despite the cool mountain breeze, a promise of the life they would build together, a life neither had imagined when a blizzard forced 2 strangers to rely on nothing but their shared warmth to keep each other alive.